All right, so 1.6 in it is about some things involving designed experiments, and uh, these are what I want to do basically is just introduce you to some terms that are going to come up throughout the semester, and they're probably things that you've heard in just the real world, and so it'll be nice for you to know what they mean if you don't already know. Um, so far we've discussed observational studies in some pretty good detail. When we talk about collecting random samples, that's useful for both observational studies and designed experiments, but it's even more important in observational studies than in designed experiments. In designed experiments, we have to take care of some other issues. So to demonstrate how changes in the explanatory variable cause changes in the response, the researcher needs to run an experiment. An experiment is a controlled study. So controlled study meaning that everything except for the explanatory variables are held constant, okay? So it's a controlled study conducted to determine the effect that varying one or more explanatory variables has on the response variable. Explanatory variables are sometimes called factors, right? So any combinations of the values of the factors is called a treatment. So this is all maybe a little bit confusing because it seems like we're using like 4 different words to describe the same thing. Well, really, a factor is a synonym for an explanatory variable, okay? So those 2 terms mean the same thing. But a treatment is any combination of the values of a factor. So for example, if you are interested in studying like weight loss, then some of the factors affecting weight loss would be diet, exercise, sleep habits, right? So let's just take those 3, right? So if you were to prescribe, if you were to like look at a group of individuals and split them up into a whole bunch of different groups and give them different kinds of treatments, like maybe one group you tell them to just exercise for 30 minutes a day and you don't tell them anything about diet or sleep habits. And then another group you say, you know, exercise for 30 minutes a day, but also follow this low carb diet, right? And then maybe this other group you say exercise for 30 minutes a day, but also make sure you get 8 hours of sleep every night, right? Anyway, each of these different groups is getting a different treatment, right? There are multiple factors, multiple explanatory variables involved, but each different combination of those factors is called a treatment, right? So they're all receiving different treatments. The goal in an experiment is to determine the effect that various treatments have on the response variable. To give us something to which we can compare the effects of different treatments, we usually wish to have a control group. To which an already existing treatment or perhaps no treatment at all is applied. So if you are trying to determine the effectiveness of these different treatments in weight loss, right, the different treatments that we've discussed for weight loss, then it would also be useful to have a 4th group where you don't give them any instructions, right? And so that way you can compare you know, whether the groups that you gave instructions to had a different outcome than if they weren't given any instructions at all, right? So that would be the control group in this case. Now, for best results, the control group should be the control group shouldn't realize that they are the control group. If you can make it so that the control group doesn't know that they are the control group, then that's going to give you the best possible results, right? So sometimes the control group is given a fake treatment to trick them into thinking that they're actually receiving some kind of treatment, right? So they're given some kind of fake treatment that doesn't do anything, but that looks, tastes, and smells like the experimental treatment. And these are called placebos. So if you've ever seen the word placebo before and you weren't sure what it means, this is what it means, right? A placebo is just a fake treatment that's used to trick people into thinking that they're receiving some kind of experimental treatment. For example, if a doctor wants to test a particular heart medication, she might give one group the medication and the other group a sugar pill. In this case, the sugar pill would be the placebo. And here's why it's important that you have that you trick people into thinking that they're receiving the real treatment, because let's say that in this particular study, the doctor wants to know if her patients are going to experience headache as a side effect of taking this heart medication. And so if she just doesn't give one of the groups medication and she gives the other group a medication, then the group who gets the medication might report an increased level of headaches. But that might not be because of the medication that they were given. That could just be their mind playing a trick on them, right? Psychologically, they've sort of psyched themselves out, and so they say that they experienced a headache when they didn't really experience a headache. Or maybe they did experience a headache, but it wasn't because of the medication, like, right? They would have just experienced a headache anyway. And so the only way to determine that would be to give the control group a placebo, so that if in both groups you have 5% of people say they experienced a headache, then that way you can be sure that the people who received the heart medication weren't experiencing headache because of the medication. They were most likely either the headache was just a figment of their imagination, or they would have gotten a headache whether or not they took that heart medication, right? Anyway, so that's why we give people placebos. Is to try to get rid of biases that creep in when people sort of psychologically psych themselves out, knowing that they're receiving some kind of treatment. So that's one thing. So that was one of the vocabulary words that I wanted to introduce to you, because it's something that will come up again throughout the course. Another concept that you may have seen in the past, but you may not be totally clear on what it means, is the idea of blinding. So you may have heard of like double-blind experiments and stuff. Here's what that means. So many experiments use a technique called blinding to make sure that each group gets treated in the same way. In single-blind experiments, the experimental subject does not know which treatment he or she is receiving. An experiment should be at least single-blind. Okay, well, I mean, some experiments it's impossible to use blinding. Like in the weight loss experiment, it's impossible to tell. It's impossible for the subjects not to know that they're being told to exercise 30 minutes a day, right? It's not possible to use blinding in that particular experiment. But for like a medication type of thing, then yeah, definitely you want to have at least single-blind experiments so that the people don't know if they're receiving the real medication or the placebo, right? And that would be single blinding. In double blind experiments, neither the experimental subject nor the researcher in contact with the experimental subject knows which treatment the experimental subject is receiving. And that might be a little confusing to you, because you might say, well, wait a second, if the experimenter doesn't know which treatment they're giving out, then how are they going to keep track of all this stuff? Well, somebody knows, okay? In a double-blind experiment, it's like you would have one researcher who knows what treatment everyone is receiving, but they give the medication to a second researcher, and then that second researcher is the one who actually comes in contact with the patients. And the second researcher who actually comes in contact with the experimental subjects, they don't know. They're the ones who don't know what treatment is being given out, right? But the first researcher does know, right? Somebody has to know, because somebody has to keep track of stuff. But double-blind experiments just take that extra precaution, right? So that the researcher coming in contact with the experimental subjects doesn't know what medication is being given out, and that way they can't, unintentionally give away anything, right? Because they don't know themselves. So that's what blinding is, and that's what it means to have a single blind and a double blind experiment. Okay, and that's all I really want to say about that. Right, there's your homework assignment, and that'll do it for chapter 1.